Cold War stuff has been in the news lately, and everyone is looking at Ukraine. For years, this has been a hot topic that I've taken interest in, as it's an example of how modern world powers can confront each other, even in a time of modern globalization. The war in Donbass has been silent since 2015, but has recently seen a sharp rise in tension with the separatists mobilizing their troops and even Russia bolstering its forces on the border. As much as relations between Russia and the West have deteriorated and everyone is propping up arms or the recent escalation in Ukraine, there's one thing that hasn't changed. None of this is new. Russia has been invading Ukraine since 2014, from the annexation of Crimea to bolstering the ranks of the separatists in conventional combat to cyber attacks to even artillery strikes from across the border. This is the reason why Donbass hasn't been reclaimed by the Ukrainian military all these years. Russia has also been stationing troops on its border with Ukraine for years, as well as conducting military drills, which they used as a cover up to send troops and weaponry into Ukraine. So, this entire thing is either a PR stunt to grab the attention of the world media so that less attention is on some deeper political game, or the current economic circumstances is what's pushing the Kremlin to look for a faster end to the conflict. Hell, even certain Russian commanders have stated that they feel like they haven't succeeded in Ukraine. But at least two useful things are coming from this. One, first is the information that we know that China will be supporting Russia in their escapades, and two, NATO is bolstering its presence in the east of the alliance, something that should have been double in size back in 2014. Now, we know that the Kremlin has said that they don't want NATO troops in its east and are pressing that on Ukraine. I wanted to talk about that for a moment, as this also reflects on Ukraine as well. Countries like the Baltic states or Poland have every right to be in NATO or the European Union. They are independent nations with the right to make their own decisions. And if Putin really does respect sovereignty like he claims he does, then he really has no basis in making these claims. Now, I know that trolls will attack this video and complain about how this is the West's fault because they expanded their alliance eastward and they threatened Russia.
That's so dumb. You are really dumb.
Let me start by saying that there was no official treaty or agreement between Russia and the West about expansion. The topic of NATO expansion eastward didn't even exist in debate back in 1991. Even Mikhail Gorbachev himself admitted in a 2014 interview this wasn't the case. In his own words, he said, "The topic of NATO expansion was not discussed and it wasn't brought up at all. I say this with full responsibility. Not a single Eastern European nation raised the issue, and Western leaders didn't bring it up either." And what really debunks the idea that there was an agreement was the declassification of White House transcripts from 1997 that revealed Bill Clinton's refusal to have a so called gentleman's agreement about the relationship between former Soviet republics and NATO. And although I think Ukraine needs to make some reforms before they actually join NATO, Russia doesn't exactly have the right to use the no expansion myth. Their claim about a 100% guarantee that Ukraine will not join NATO is also false, because Article 1 of the Helsinki Final Act, which was established by the OSCE in 1975, states that any nation has the right to join or not join any international organization they desire. Being that Russia is a member of the OSCE, it also has the obligation to hold this principle. This is what can be applied to the Baltic states and Ukraine. If that's what its people want, then no one else should intervene.
Other discussions could take place on the European security architecture while Russia has a military aggression in the middle of Europe in Ukraine. When the last Russian soldier is leaving Ukrainian territory, then there could be a space for discussion. And the very principled position we've agreed on, and it has already been voiced by Russians and by NATO Secretary General, is that there's no room for any dialogue when it comes to the open door policy and annexability of enlargement. So this has put on Russia in a framework that no discussions on the ultimatums could take place. And the principal position of Ukraine is that aggressor is not in a position to put any lines.
Does Ukraine want to be a part of NATO then?
It's absolutely important because you might have heard all around here in Ukraine, in US and in NATO that we all stick to the principle no talks about Ukraine without Ukraine. We do deliver on it. Whenever it's like in a Normandy format, bilateral talks with Russia and US, Russia and NATO, but until Ukraine is not in NATO and EU, it means that still these talks, some of the talks are taking place without Ukraine. And it's absolutely unacceptable because my country is the largest country in Europe. We are already part of the security architecture, of the economic architecture. So it's really time for us to be over the table. And this is the discussions also we had in Brussels.
So yes, you guys want to be a part of the NATO alliance.
We have to. And I think that this is the best sanctions about any ultimatums, putting a framework to say that Ukraine is ready to become a member of NATO, and it will become a member of NATO in the very upcoming time.
Saying that NATO is a direct threat to Russia isn't exactly accurate. From the early 2000s onward, both sides have worked together on many issues, ranging from counter-narcotics to submarine rescue and civil emergency planning. All of this was done during expansion as well. Russia was even invited to join the NATO-Russia Council. No other nation had been given that privilege. And although there was very little, there have been talks about Russia itself joining NATO. Back in 2001, when Putin was still in his early presidency, he himself even stated that he believed Moscow should join the alliance.
Was NATO, and about how Russia seriously considered joining the military alliance a decade ago.
Я помню одну из наших последних встреч с президентом Клинтоном, когда еще Клинтон был президент. Он приезжал в Москву. Да, и я в ходе дискуссии сказал, может быть, посмотреть такой вариант, что Россия, может быть, вступит в НАТО. Клинтон только ответил, что ж, я не против, но все делегации американские очень занервничала.
So I guess we could see a silver lining here. People in Russia, even those in the Russia United Party, could be friendly towards NATO. But regarding the status of Ukraine, it's something that it has to decide for itself, not have others decide it for them. Right now, that idea seems far-fetched, but like so many other events in history, it can be done. The arc of history itself is quite long, and let's hope it brings peace.